Welcome to Bcom Chapter 10, chapter titled Managing Data and Using Graphics. Disclaimer at the very beginning of the process here, please do not assume that this lecture covers everything in the chapter or that you will be tested on. You're still responsible for all the material in the chapter. Please don't let this lecture take the place of a good read of the material. I want to talk first of all about both quantitative and qualitative data and information. Qualitative means the use of words to explain ideas. Quantitative means the use of numbers to explain ideas or data, information. So in this chapter we're going to be talking about the use of quantitative data, the use of numbers that may be best expressed through graphics and illustrations. First of all, let's talk about communicating quantitative information. Generally, we use quantitative information and try to summarize it in such a fashion that it helps to classify and condense information into bits of knowledge that the reader can make sense of. So, developing proportions or percentages or fractions or ratios, all of these things become very useful to the reader. We call this common language. Common language are the proportions, percentages, fractions, or ratios. And it puts your data into easier to read language that is appreciated and better understood by most readers. The textbook says on page 162, the important thing for the report writer is to remember that reports are communication media, and everything possible should be done to make sure communication occurs effectively. So let's talk a little bit about using graphics. Graphics refers to all types of illustrations used in both written and spoken reports, and may simplify the problem of too many words. It may be too difficult to try to put into words the ideas that can be easily put into graphics. So to protect readers from being overwhelmed or simply bored with data, the authors of our textbook say report writers can design visually appealing graphics that are appropriate for the data being presented. Data reported in a table, graph, or picture will make your written analysis clearer to the reader. This quote from page 162. Further, the authors state, the use of graphics with a written discussion serves three purposes: A, to clarify, B, to simplify, or C, to reinforce data. This quote on page 163. So let's talk for a moment about the effective and the ethical use of graphics. In every type of communication event, business writers must be ethical. The truth is, our credibility and our reputation are at risk anytime we try to communicate. We must be careful to be ethical, and so there are several questions that could be asked to help us in our quest for being ethical. First of all, does the graphic contribute to the overall understanding of the idea being communicated? Does it make sense to the reader? And are graphics easily understood? The second question. One way to make certain that our graphics are easily understood is to avoid certain things. First of all, to avoid chart junk. C-H-A-R-T-J-U-N-K. Chart junk. Chart junk is simply decorative distractions that blur relevant data. It's just too much going on in one graphic illustration. Too many different sizes of fonts, too many different colors, too many activities within a graphic. Avoid chart junk. Avoid distracting titles. Make sure that the meaning of the titles is very clear to the reader and helps to clarify what you're trying to do. And thirdly, create a consistent design. Don't keep changing your design prospects. If you're using bar charts in a report, be consistent with your bar charts throughout the report. Use the same font, use the same colors, use the same width of bar chart, and etc., so that you have a consistent design throughout your report. So finally we ask, is the graphic honest? Does it mislead? Can it be misunderstood? Those are essential questions we have to ask to be certain that we are ethical in our communication. The textbook talks about 6 different types of graphic aids, and I'm going to discuss these just briefly, but for a clearer and illustrated discussion of these different graphic aids, please consult your textbook. The first type of graphic aids are tables. Tables are where we present data in both columns and in rows. One of the necessary things with a table is to provide clear titles for each row and column, titles that are descriptive of the information in the table. Other suggestions are in the text, and I encourage you to refer to that. A second kind of graphic aid is the bar chart. The bar chart helps us when we are trying to compare quantities. The length of the bars indicate quantities of whatever we're measuring. So the longer the length, the more the quantity. We can also have what we call grouped bar charts or clustered bar charts. These compare more than just one quantity, so we can make comparisons of different quantities by grouping them together or clustering them together. Segmented bar charts are subdivided, stacked bars where we divide them out to show how components contribute to a total figure. Now, this is edging in on the concept of a pie chart, so it's very careful, it's very important for you to compare both the bar chart and the pie chart in the textbook so that you can see the difference between a subdivided stacked bar and a pie chart. A fourth concept of bar charts, and it's somewhat related to the bar chart, is the pictogram, where we use pictures or where we use symbols to illustrate objects. And not just objects, but concepts or numerical values represented by symbols. For example, you're driving down the street and you see a street sign with that has children on it, a boy and a girl. It's a suggestion that there are children playing in the area, and obviously you're to pay more attention. So we use pictographs a lot in our society, in our diverse society, to try and explain the concepts that we're trying to communicate. A further variation of the bar chart is called the Gantt chart. Now this is used for tracking progress toward completing a series of events over time, and it's an aid in tracking the timeline of a project. So what we could do is put up little boxes with the steps in the process and connect those with lines, or in tracking the timeline of a project, we stretch it out over a time frame and talk about the different activities that need to be completed during that time. This is called a Gantt chart. By using color, by avoiding distortion, and by using simple labels, we can have a more ethical kind of bar chart. So by paying attention to these 3 little things, using color to clarify our ideas, avoiding distortion in the size or the shape of our bars, and simple labels, we become better ethical communicators. Examples of all these bar charts can be found on page 166. It's a good page illustrating the things that we've just talked about. A third type of graphic aid discussed in the text are the line charts. Line charts depict changes in quantitative data over time, and it illustrates to us different trends that may be occurring. So if we're trying to look at distribution of activities over a period of time, a line chart may be the best way of doing so. We want to be ethical in the process of demonstrating the quantitative data over time, and there are some rules to follow here as well to be ethical. First of all, use horizontal axis for the time and the vertical axis for the amount. These are most commonly used, and to follow this procedure will help be more clear to the reader. Further, begin the vertical axis at 0. To try and start it at some other quantity may be deceptive in the way it is perceived by the reader. And third, divide the vertical and horizontal scales into equal increments. Don't start out wide at one side and narrow at the other side to show the compression of amounts or of quantities or anything like that. Keep them equal so that the reader will have a better understanding of what he or she is seeing. Let's move on now to pie charts, the fourth type of graphic aid used in our textbook. Pie charts help to show how parts of a whole are divided or distributed. Once again, check the text to distinguish when you would use a bar chart instead of a pie chart. But you've all seen pie charts, and you've seen how they're a round circle and they divide into wedges to give us an idea of how the parts combine to create the whole. Once again, here with as well as with the other types of graphical aids, there are some ethical considerations. First of all, position the largest or the most emphasized slice at the 12 o'clock position. It brings better clarity to the reader. Secondly, label each slide clearly. And third, it just helps if we avoid third-dimensional imaging. It creates a better and a clearer pie chart for people to understand. A fifth type of graphic aid, and one that we don't use a lot, but is one to be reminded of, are maps. A map shows geographical locations, and there will be times in your reporting when you will need to show geography or location places best demonstrated by a map. Thus, if you have demographics that you want to illustrate, if you have delivery systems you want to reveal, if you have facility locations you want to pinpoint, all of these are best done on a map. And the sixth type of graphic activity that the textbook refers to are flowcharts. There are two different kinds of flowcharts that might be considered. The first is commonly called a flowchart and may be a step-by-step diagram of a procedure or process. This flowchart will help people to understand the procedures that need to be followed one step at a time, moving from one box to the next box and following that process. An organizational chart is another type of flowchart, but an organizational chart is a graphic depiction of a system or of an organization or a group, and the responsibilities divided within that group or the personnel of that group. So, for example, a flowchart can clarify the work tasks or a telephone tree within an organization, while an organizational chart will provide a pictorial image of the structure of an organization. And by using a word processor to demonstrate these different charts, you can easily change them and update them as circumstances within your organization change. The final primary issue or component of Chapter 10 talks about including graphics in a text. And there are a few rules you want to be very careful to note. The textbook states that text and graphics are partners in the communication process. They work together, and they have to be seen together. So two rules to follow. First of all, the graphic must be introduced in the text immediately before the graphic appears. You have the narrative explaining the value and the meaning of the graphic, and then you show the graphic. This will help the reader to find meaning and significance when they come to the graphic. Give the explanation first, and then reveal the graphic. And secondly, another rule, if the graphic will not fit on the page where it is introduced, it should be at the top of the next page. Well, the proper and ethical use of graphics in your reports will help your reader understand your communication and persuasive arguments. You will be rewarded with readers who have a better understanding of your message and a willingness to comply with your requests. And that's just plain good business. Thanks for joining me in Chapter 10. We'll see you again.